Hello everyone, this is Ryan here with Transient Light Studios. We had a number of requests for a tutorial on how we did the spherical panoramas that are on our website. I'm going to start with saying that this was all done in Flowgraph. You could probably do it in Python or make your own system in, say, C# or something like that. But in this case, it was just easier for me to quickly make it in Flowgraph. So I will explain how I did that. Now, as with anything else, I always start by adding a new layer. And in this case, it's part of my game logic. So I'm just going to call it logic omni capture. I turn that into the active layer. And then I'm going to go to default, Flowgraph entity. And I'm just going to call this my omni capture. It appears I already have something named that way. So I'm going to call it capture 2, which will be the example in this case. And I will save out this Flowgraph and include it with the tutorial so you can look at it yourself. Okay, so I'm just going to open Flowgraph and I'm going to create a new group. Call it Omni Group 2 because I did forget that I already have this system set up in here. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to open it up in here. So Omni Group 2. All right, now you can be more organized with your naming. Personally, I mean, for this example, it doesn't really matter, but I would definitely try to be as organized as possible. So first thing I'm going to do is start with the game start node. And if you wonder how to get that really fast, I just hit Q and then click on the game start since it's the default node. You can also click add start node if you want that node. Okay, so now the way I do things logically is that I like to set up my initial conditions before I do anything else. So I'm going to throw out a logic any here because I know I'm going to need multiple inputs. So I'm just going to put that to the side because I'm going to use it to copy. And I'm going to go ahead and bring out an input key because I want this system to trigger when I press a certain key. And in this case, I want it to press when I press E for it to trigger. You can do anything else. I mean, like, okay, for this just Q since I believe it's an unused key. Now what I want is I want to set a number because I'm going to be creating a sampler. In this case, it's going to be called a timer because this outputs a value at a particular time. This is going to be my sampler. So this will be how fast it takes pictures. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up this logic any to paused because I want it to be paused by default. So I'm going to create a set number and I'm going to have it set to 1 for the first one and 0 for the second one. 0 meaning it is not paused. So I'm going to have it start out paused because I don't want it to run at any time unless I hit the actual key. And when I want it to start will be when I hit this here. Now I'm going to need an any logic going into the stop here because this is how I turn it off. So I'm going to put a logic any there and throw that start. And for now, this works. So now when I press Q, the sampler will now start to sample. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a camera because I'm going to need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a camera from current view. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set this camera to, I'm just going to change this a little bit so I can see it better. I'm going to go ahead and 0 out its rotation. I'm going to place it roughly in the middle of where I want it to take the capture. Okay, so now going through this, I have my sampler. Now I need it to actually do something. This is when things start getting a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to need to choose. I'm going to start with another set number here. Okay. So every time this samples, this is going to set a number, and this is going to be my angle. So this is however many, the degrees in change, in rotation for the camera. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and this is going to be my rotation angles. I'm just going to say angle. Okay, so now I have the rotation angle, what it's going to change. I need to start putting in the actual functionality. So I'm going to do an entity position. So this is going to control this camera's entity position. And I make it a good habit to create an entity ID for all these nodes, because it's just easier for me to manage things. Especially if I want to have multiple things affecting a single entity, that way change the entity, all I have to do is assign it to one entity ID, and it goes to all of my nodes at the same time. Okay, so I need something to control the rotation. So what I want to do is I want this initial number here, which is going to be the number that I set, to be added to each time. So I'm actually going to I'm gonna just have to unhide all unfreeze all these. Okay, so I'm going to need to get a 2 vector, because vec3. Oh, whoops. This node, I'm generally better off just doing this. Going to go 2 vector. And I'm also going to get a vec3 from vector. This just gives me control over these if I need it. So I'm going to push this one in here. And I want to affect I believe it's Z rotation with this number. So I'm going to create a math add. Because every time this goes through, I want to add a certain value to this. So the incoming number will be the same here. And I will get the result out of the add that I want. It's going to add an angle to the rotation of the entity position for the camera every single time this sampler is sampled. And I'm going to just go ahead and set up my logic for the actual rotation. So I have an output now. All right. So I want this to be done a certain number of times, and there's something called a MathCounter, which can give me the overall count of how many times this happens. So this will have to be whatever the number of times that you need for this angle to equal 360 degrees. So since I'm not feeling particularly mathy right now, you just divide 360 by whatever number of shelves you want. So let's say 16. Oops. That would be, oh, okay, well, that'll be 22.5. So it'll take 16 pictures in orbit until it reaches 360. So basically every time that this is sampled, and I want this to come out, and every time it's sampled, I want the count to be checked. And actually, just in general, you should use the math equal check, because this is it gives out a sample only whenever it's checked, and I like this better because I think it's more efficient. So that way it's not being sampled every frame. I feel like you save a bit of performance there, and I don't know, I guess I just like to have everything as optimized as I can. Okay, so when this reaches 16, it'll output a true value. So now we're starting to get our large data. I know it probably doesn't make much sense what I'm doing just yet, so I'm actually going to I'm going to try and make this make sense. So we have our camera position, And we're going to control this camera position from the to vector. So we want this vector to control this entity output. So I'm just going to create an example here. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and output a number. I guess I'll do whatever the count is for this. And we'll go ahead and input that to the Y rotation of the camera. Okay, and it's going to start unpaused. Now, what this does, as you can see, is it's sampling and rotating this camera. It's on the Y. So we know that this works. This entity position here is controlling that position of this entity, which is the camera, and that all works just fine. I'm going to change the period of this to something smaller, like say 0.25, so it'll take a picture every quarter second. And I'm going to return that to default of paused. And I'm just going to verify that the pause is working. Pause is working. Okay, so now let's turn this into a real working effect. So we want to add this amount to, which is 2.5, to the output of this node here to the z-axis. So we're just basically rotating the z-axis, which is going to be in a concentric circle. So that's going to be our orbit. All right, so set my angle. This is where things get a little more complicated because I actually have to get my initial shelf value, which is the shelf value, basically the rotation in this direction, which you obviously need. So I'm going to look at getting the bottom value first. So let's set our initial value at negative 60 degrees, I guess would be a good number. So we're going to start by having that set. And that also means that we're going to need another logic any. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. And then this value is going to need to go into x, because this is going to control our x rotation. So we want x rotation, which is this right here. We can verify that that rotation is indeed x, and that negative 60 degrees is looking through the camera at a downward position. So I'm going to go to my cameras. Camera 5, actually. Yes, so I'm getting the floor, which is what I want. I'm going to go ahead and try it out. Let's see where we are right now. So I'm going to set my initial value to this value. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this camera back to normal so we can verify that this is working. So I'm going to hit play. Okay, camera is correctly positioned. Oh, wait, maybe not. Hold on, is that putting it on a slight angle? That is. 60 to 22.5. Oh, right, because I'm getting an initial input of 22.5. As you can see from here, it's 22.5. I'm getting that from this z value to it by default in here. Okay, so I need this to actually sample. So I'm going to reset this, and I'm going to hit the sample button, which in my case is also a shortcut to raise your flashlight. So that's unpausing, and we're receiving the input here. But you'll notice that the number is staying the same. This is because we don't have any way to loop this number back into A. So we actually need to add something in between here. Could be a logic any. In this case, I'm going to use a logic once. Oops. Logic once. All right, so I'm going to output into, you know, I could actually just make this a little easier on myself. and put it in here. Oh, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the play button off so that the Flowgraph is disabled. I'm just going to give myself a little bit more room. Okay. So now that I have this, I'm going to run the number of the 2 vector through this, and it's going to come back out to the math add. And then when it comes back out, we can actually reset for every sample. So in case this is just a little confusing to you, what I'm doing here is let me get that back on top. There we go. The numbers coming through here, it's going to the add. 22.5 is into B, so B is added to A. The A number comes out to Z. Vector 3 goes into my logic 1 skate, is output back to the add, and is then this logic 1 skate is reset every time the sampler is sampled. So if this works correctly, we should get a rotation every time the number is returned. Oop, looks like I'm missing something here. Oh, you know what? That's true. I am returning a vector into this, so I cannot do that. So I'm going to need to use that FromVec node that I added a while ago. So I'm going to get the position, the current position of Z, and I'm going to put that into the A. Let's go ahead and try this again. As you can see, the camera is now rotating at 22.5 at a sustained rate. Good. We're making progress. Okay. Now that we have this, I need to incorporate a way for it to stop anytime that this counter reaches 16. Notice there's a reset here. So I can make this loop and reset the counter every time a new shelf, which is the x-axis rotation, I'm going to call that a shelf. So our first shelf is going to be negative 60 degrees. So when that shelf reaches 16 captures, it's going to kick up the rotation on the x-axis to the next shelf. That number can be any number you want, depending on how many pictures you want your capture to be. I'm going to clean this up real quick, and I'm going to start checking when the capture is done. So as soon as this value here that's coming out of our counter is equal to 16, we need to get the position. So entity get position. And I'm going to get the position of the camera entity that I'm using. When this is true, get the position. And what we want to do is we want to get the rotation. So we're going to use another FromVec node. We want to get this rotation. I'm sorry, actually we need to get the X rotation, because we need to know what rotation value that this camera is at. Just in case you change the rotation, this will sense what that rotation is, so it can adjust for it. And not only that, but we can also make it so that we can return the value that that rotation is at after every shelf. So you can then add to that in the same way that we add to the angle here. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that so I don't forget. And always comment your stuff, because otherwise it's, like I'll come back to it, and even now in this, this has been about, I'd say a month since I made this last time, so I have lost a little bit of track how I did it. So I'm just kind of relearning as I go along. I believe that this is good for learning because this shows any errors that I may make, and you can fix them easier since you will know how to fix them as I will have to fix them. Okay. Next up, we're going to throw this value of y here, or x, sorry, and we're going to go ahead and add another add. So we're going to run this number here. Once this is an A, we need to add a certain amount to it. So 30-degree shelves. So that'll be -60, -30, 0, 30, 60 for your shelves. Okay? Now we need this number to go back to something. So I guess this would be a good reason to put a logic any next to the initial shelf. Oh, I did. Perfect. Okay. So anytime that this reaches 16, it will get the current position and will then add 30 degrees to the shelf. Input for shelf. Okay. So this would be right about when I just need to test and make sure this works as expected. But first I need to be able to reset this. So I need this counter to reset anytime that we hit 16. So just by the fact that this becomes true, if this becomes true, we need to reset the counter. This is just giving us a running tally. So I'm actually going to put a display message. And this one's a little interesting. The shortcut for this is just to hit Q and type in display, and the first one that comes up is display message. So I just want to check how many times that this has been true. And I want to go ahead and show that as a message. It'll show in the top left-hand corner. For the cases of the recording, I'm going to make this bigger. I'm going to make this like huge font so it's easy to see. So let's try it, see how it works. All right, we've done 1 rotation, 2 rotations, 3 rotations, 4. Now it looks to me like this is triggering a little bit too early. I'm going to need to check and see why that is the case. But we're most of the way there. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this because I'll need to know what that is later. Number of shelves. So this is the number of shelf captures we'll have. I could be wrong, but I feel like that count is going way too fast. I'm just going to verify. Okay. Checked as 1. So that's the first one. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting an additional number tacked onto this because I'm getting a number from the add node that I have here. So I'm going to need to check this in a slightly different way. I should be able to get this by checking it from the 2 vector. Oh, you know what? Yeah, 2 vectors should work out. So I'm just going to check this via here. Just so I can verify that it's only coming through once. So let's try this again. As you can see, I am still getting additional changes in my equals check. The count shouldn't be going up like that. Unless I'm getting an additional sample. So I can try using this instead, which would probably be, in general, a good idea. So I'll go ahead and sample this from the same thing. By the way, if you want to add another link from, say, this into the check, but you don't want to remove it like it usually does, you can hold down Shift, click and let go on the input of your whatever you desire, and that will keep both intact. Much better. All right, as you can see, the camera has added the next shelf. It is now going up, and the shelves are now being counted correctly. We're almost done. All right, now we need it to stop once it takes all these shelves. Now, I think I divided by 16 here, 360 degrees by 16. So that would be 16 captures for each. So when the of this counter here, which counts our number of shelves, reaches the number of shelves that we want to take, which in this case is 5, we can put in another equal check. So when this is equal to 5, the output of this true will stop the entire thing. So I'm going to put this. Oop, I did not lock in that, so I'm going to have to change that. There we go. I like to put the order of the inputs in the order in which they actually happen. So basically what this does is this just pauses it once the number of shelves that are being checked, which is this, equals 5. So I'm going to verify that this system works before I add in the actual capture. So I'm going to go ahead and change my camera to the camera that I'm using for the Omni capture. I'm going to hit play, which will put my initial position just at the first initial 22.5 degree angle, so that our capture, we don't double up. Because if you take 22.5 degrees from 360 degrees, you'll end up with 2 pictures of the same thing at the end. All right, I'm going to hit Q. Everything's looking right so far. Five captures may have been too many. This may cause a gimbal lock problem. Yeah, 4 captures was correct, but we'll see what happens. Oh, when it equals 5, stop. Actually, I did that in my head. I guess that works. So you have just completed an Omni capture, but you haven't gotten anything out of it yet. So let's go ahead and take the screenshot just slightly after the camera moves, so we can just make sure we don't have any problems. First of all, I'm just going to go ahead and hit the play button to reset my view. Okay. So now what we need is a CVAR, which I believe is called a console variable. If I type on console variable, you can get or set a console variable. So our CVAR in this case is going to be our get screenshot 2, value of 1. Every time that this sampler samples, we want to add a very slight delay. And we will set this CVAR to 2. 0.1. Actually, considering the sample is every quarter second, let's go ahead and make that even a lesser delay. Let's do that, just in case. All right, you now will capture these screenshots every time the camera is, the sample is picked. So I'm going to go ahead and try this out. And I'm going to put the folder in which I have this build, this particular test build. Your screenshots will save in user screenshots, and I have a bunch of stuff in here that isn't really necessary. So I'm just going to put that in my old. All right. Let us go ahead and just so I don't get anything wrong here, I am going to get rid of this. Okay. So let's look at this and let's check and see. I'm going to minimize Flowgraph and see if our Omni capture system is working as intended. Play. And and cue. Okay, it doesn't seem to be capturing like it should, so I'm just going to check and make sure I did this correctly. I'm wondering if my delay may be causing an issue, so I'm going to check something. Oh, I know what it is. Ah, stupid me. I'm so used to using the console. Sorry about that, guys. All right, this should work perfect. I'm going to go ahead and save just in case. I have a bad habit of causing problems. All right. And as you can see, your screenshots are being taken on the right side of the screen that I'm recording here. Okay, so now that we've taken our screenshots, we are going to work on making this a panorama. So we have all our pictures that we took with our new Omni Capture system. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all these and I'm just going to drag them into PT GUI. Now you can use any stitching software that you want, but I find PT GUI is the easiest, and it's not all that expensive for a normal license. So as soon as you drag them in, you're going to get this window here. I always just click normal lens and put in 60 millimeters because that's fairly close to what it is in the actual camera that I'm using. Then I hit OK. All right. Now that I have the images in, I'm going to align them. Now this may take longer on your machine depending on how many photos you take for your captures and your CPU and GPU. All right, preview's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and close the editor because it looks okay. And it's going to tell you the output resolution, and this output resolution will change based on the resolution of the pictures you take from the viewport. And just in case you need a little refresher, if you want to change the resolution that you have on your viewport, you can go to the camera that you're currently using up in the top left here, go to resolution, and change it to the resolution at which you want to capture. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, okay, that's a pretty good place to save it. Let's just call this Panorama 1. And let's go ahead and create the panorama. Okay. As you can see, here's the panorama. Now this is the demo version. And don't forget to turn off motion blur, because when I captured this, motion blur was turned on, so it kind of causes motion blur problems. But if you want to get rid of that, it's not hard. So I'm just going to reset the play here. So getting ready to capture, and if you want to turn off motion blur in the console, you can type in R_motion blur and then space and 0. That will turn off the motion blur so that whenever you hit the capture button, you will no longer have any motion blur on your photos. So hopefully this will be good enough for you to make your own panoramas, and I hope you can come up with some pretty cool results. Looking forward to seeing you guys' work. All right. One last thing I want to show you is and I can show you what the panorama looks like. If you haven't already, you can go to our website and you can see some panoramas we took. The lighting doesn't necessarily represent the final lighting, but these are actually pretty cool. And depending on your internet, they will take a little while because they are pretty big images. And you can look around. You can roll your middle mouse button to zoom in. So yeah, that's it. Hope you guys have fun with it.